Hello guys and welcome to this new YouTube video. In this series we are going to see how to play with and against an isolated pawn. So on the board you have on your left, you see here on d4 a central isolated pawn, and this isolated pawn in fact is giving usually a good activity for the piece, for the color that has it, but it's a weakness on the long term. So let's see the general principle first of how you deal when you have the isolated pawn. So I open on the right of your screen 5 principles. The first one is that you should keep pieces on the board. As this is a weakness on d4, the more pieces you have, the more activity you can create, and the more activity you create, the more chance you have to either win some material, either create some weaknesses for the black side. The second principle is that this pawn is giving you a space advantage and is giving you two beautiful squares for your pieces, which are e5 and c5. You will very often see a knight coming on e5 here because it's attacking on the king side, because you often attack the king when you have this pawn on d4 isolated. And it also sometimes can jump on c6 when black is playing the b6 move. The third principle is that you are always trying to push the pawn to d5. This is always hard to achieve, but if you can push on d5, you always have a good activity for your pieces, and we are going to watch it in more details in other videos with some example, because it's a bit abstract right now, I guess, for you. But this is a very important principle. Black will be very careful to make sure you are not going to play d5. The fourth principle, and it's I think it's what happened. I mean it's really what happened more often, is that you are attacking the king with the help of the isolated pawn. So you can see, so the little a on your right is that it happens that you can sacrifice your knight on f7. I saw that a lot of time. King takes and the bishop takes on e6, and you have some strong attack on the king. So this is a possibility, is to sacrifice a knight on f7. You can also often see that the rook is coming through the third rank and coming on g3, h3, f3 to attack the king side even more. You can see sometimes that the bishop, if the pawn structure is like that, with the pawn on h6, that you will see a bishop sacrifice on h6 with some really strong attack coming. Again, the rook can come on the third rank. You will see against a pawn structure when black play g6, which is the best way to defend. Sometimes white is launching the h pawn in order to weaken the king side, and of course white is using the open e file and the open c file also for his rook when it can to attack the piece on the e file or c file, depending. Well, maybe this is a bit abstract for the moment, but as I said, we will watch game in next videos. And so the first principle is that sometimes you attack and play along the c file. It happens when the pawn is on c6, like the black pieces cannot really develop themselves easily, and if they have such a setup, by example, sorry, it's not a king, it's a queen. And like they cannot play really neither b6, neither nothing, and they are a bit stuck with their pieces over there. So this is about the principle you should know when you play with the isolated pawn. Now let's see the principle when you play against the isolated pawn. So let me take out the pieces and get the right board and the right writing on the right. So you should exchange pieces when you play against an isolated pawn. This is just very logical. As we saw, white is trying to attack and to push d5, And the less pieces, the less activity, the more this pawn is becoming weak and easier it is to attack and harder it is to defend. The second one is that you should always protect from playing d4, d5. As we saw, it's one of the main threats of this position with white, so you should always make sure that it's not happening. Also, if white is really pressing doing that, you can always put a blocker on d5, which is often the knight. So you just protect it, and you make sure that you are always going to take back with a piece in order to keep the weakness. Because if you would take with a pawn, then well, this d4 pawn will not be a mistake, a weakness anymore. It would just be a symmetrical pawn structure. So the third one is that usually when you are attacked on the h7 square, like white is often creating some attack with the bishop on b1, maybe the queen on d1 or on h3, or it could be a knight on g5. You try to protect yourself with the pawn on g6 and not the pawn on h6. As we saw, this pawn on h6 could even be weak for a bishop sacrifice. So that's the reason why you prefer to protect with the pawn on g6. And also, the last principle is that it's not bad for you if you can. It happens like that in a lot of positions where the pawn, when bishop comes on b4, to exchange this and go to another pawn structure called isolated pawn structure, when your two rooks are coming and those pawns are very hard to defend, and white has really problem on the light squares. This c3 pawn is really harassed by example by a knight on d5, and well, this is the first principle. So that's for me the key principle for the both colors. I mean, for the one having and for the one playing against the isolated pawn. What I would like to tell you in conclusion is that there are a few endgames. I would just like to introduce you to a few endgames, and then you will know more in other videos. Just to tell you that usually this type of endgame with two rooks against two rooks is drawn. This is a drawn endgame because black cannot win this pawn, because if they push, you can just take back. But if the queens are still on the board, this endgame is going. It's not an endgame because the queen are on the board, but this position is going to be winning for black, because black will have a chance to play e5, and now there will be a pin on the rook, so the pawn will be lost. And with the queen on the board, it's much harder to bring the king to protect your pieces. And about the minor pieces, it's important to know that with the defending side, you don't want to stay with your dark square bishop if your pawn is on with your isolated points on dark square, because all those positions when you stay with those bishops are always a lot harder to defend. So that's all for the moment. I will come back with other videos with concrete example for each topic, for each type of game that can occur with the isolated pawn are coming. So thank you for watching, and keep tuned, subscribe. Thank you, goodbye.